Meet my new friend Anne. Even though she's a born and raised American, Anne is passionate about Filipino culture. Having spent lots of time living in the Philippines and soaking up all things Filipino, she decided to start creating content to break down and compare the interesting cultural differences between the US and the Philippines. You guys should definitely check out her TikTok page. Links in the description. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. I had a great time with Anne, talking about the American perspective of the Philippines, what it's like being in a multicultural relationship, Filipino cuisine, and so much more. I hope you guys enjoy the video. So I'm not sure, you said that you were still learning Tagalog. We can do like Taglish, whatever you're comfortable with.
It'll probably be Taglish. I'm like so out of practice, it's embarrassing.
That's okay. Kamusta ka na?
Mabuti, ikaw?
Mabuti? Okay lang. Taga saan ka?
Michigan.
Saan ka sa Pilipinas noon?
Quezon City for 1 year. Tapos Cainta for almost 1 year.
2 years ka sa Pilipinas noon?
Apo.
Wow, matagal na yun. Your husband is Filipino, right? I saw that in your videos.
Yes. Yes.
That's cool. So you've been learning for a while?
Yeah, for a couple years. Should I call you Po? I don't know how old you are.
No, you don't have to. I'm 28. Something that's kind of interesting is when I make these videos, they're almost always with foreigners, right? Foreigners being people that aren't Filipino. And I don't usually use po at all. Just because I'm kind of like, well, if you're an English speaker, hindi kailangan. Para sa mga Pilipino, kailangan. Para sa mga foreigner, hindi naman sa tingin ko. Because I think like if you are an English speaker like I am, you don't have the same kind of connection with the respect system that they use in the Philippines. And so I assume that they wouldn't really be expecting me to use po with them, or they wouldn't be offended if I didn't use it. But then I get Filipinos commenting on my videos that are like, oh, technically speaking, you should be using po. And I'm like, I know. You've seen me speak Tagalog, but have you considered learning it yourself? Allow me to introduce my Beginner's Tagalog course. With 10 in-depth video lessons, this course serves as your ultimate entry point to mastering the fundamentals of the Tagalog language. Enjoy lifelong access, not only to the video lessons, but also the corresponding PDF vocabulary sheets that will help you practice new words and internalize useful sentence structures. This course is my passion project, inspired by the desire to provide a resource I wish I had when I began my Tagalog journey. Ready to learn? Check out the link in the description for more details and seize this opportunity to make Tagalog a part of your story. Now back to the video. So why did you go to the Philippines originally?
Well, it was because Jonathan and I got married in January 10, 2020, but I still had to finish school. I was in college at the time, so I had to go back to the States and finish school. And then we decided because of COVID, it would take like years for him to come to the States. So it would just be easier for me to move to the Philippines instead.
So then when you moved there, did you stay for 2 years straight, or did you come back in between?
I tried to come back and visit my family because it had been like a year and a half. I didn't really get homesick. That's the funny thing. But I did miss my family, but I wasn't really homesick. And I tried to visit them and all my flights got canceled 2 weeks before. So I couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't reschedule and it was COVID. It was very tricky. So I didn't see my family for those whole 2 years. So during college and like Jonathan and I's dating for like 4 years, I went to the Philippines almost every year. Once I think I went twice. So I had been to the Philippines maybe 5 times before moving there. So I kind of had a concept of what living there would be like. But when I actually moved during COVID, it was a little different than my, vacation experience.
Right. Yeah, I do feel like there's a really big difference between visiting somewhere for like 2 weeks and then being there for like a year. Was it hard for you to assimilate into Filipino culture?
Some aspects, yes, because I think this is the problem. In college, I made friends super easy, and I think that's a common experience. I think Americans, now that I've like traveled a little bit, are very friendly compared to the rest of the world. I never understood that. And I think some Filipinos, especially because I'm a foreigner in their eyes, I'm not speaking Tagalog fluently, they're really shy to speak to me. They don't want to speak to me. And it's not because they don't know English, it's because they don't want me to critique their English. Because it's kind of common to critique other people's grammar and stuff. You see it in comments, right? So I think that perception totally stunted a lot of growth with relationships that I wanted to have. But I was also shy too, because I'm just a foreigner, I'm not really part of the community yet.
Filipinos amongst themselves, I don't see them as being too socially conservative. They seem very outgoing and happy to meet people. But the
Yeah.
element of you being from a different country and them feeling that fear of judgment, maybe, I could see
Yeah.
them maybe acting differently.
And it was weird because you see Filipinos are always hanging out together, like they're always together. They prioritize that. So I was feeling left out sometimes because I'm like, why can't I have that? Like I so wanted to have that friendship and that community right away. What I learned is it takes a lot of time and a lot of repetition. So I just had to be patient talaga because it's not like instant like American friendships are.
Maybe even more than American or Filipino, it's different just being within your own culture and your own language. I've never been to the Philippines before, so like all of my learning has just been here in Canada, and I have a lot of Filipino friends here, and I see the way that they interact with Canadians, and it's very different than the way they interact with me, even though I'm not Filipino, just because I speak the language. And Filipinos tend to feel more comfortable with me and will even ask me questions about like, why is it that Canadians do this?
Yeah.
Why are they like that? And I'm like, you've been here for like 10 years living in Canada. You've had lots of opportunities to ask Canadians, but they weren't comfortable doing that. But with me, I'm kind of like this hybrid of like, I am Canadian, but I also speak the language, so there's trust, and then they feel comfortable coming to me to ask me about those things. So the language makes a huge difference, I think, in any culture, any country, right?
Absolutely, I agree. And I think the humor, the jokes, the little slang stuff, like even if you learn Tagalog straight from a book, when you get around Filipinos, it's not going to be the same.
So how have you been learning Tagalog over the last couple of years?
Just from hearing it, honestly. I did listen to some podcasts. I had like a little dictionary. Jonathan's parents are pastors, so when they would preach, sometimes I'm like trying to hear a word because my whole time in the Philippines, I never had a Filipino phone. I only had my American phone, so I wasn't connected to Wi-Fi or service or anything, so I can't just Google it, you know? So I'm always like looking it up in the dictionary or whatever. So I might take lessons soon. That's one of my goals for 2024, so.
Learning from a sermon, I think would be really hard because there's a lot of complicated words. Like I've talked to a few people on my channel that were missionaries in the Philippines, and that's how they learned Tagalog. I heard some stories about them learning it through the Bible, and I'm like, oh man, like the Bible even in English is hard to understand sometimes.
It's like they say like deep Tagalog because when like my dad preaches, it's mostly Taglish, so I understand like a lot of it, I would say. But then when other pastors preach, sometimes they're preaching straight from like the Tagalog translation of the Bible, and it's like deep.
I think that's a hard thing for foreigners as well, learning Tagalog, is that there really is a big difference between the written language and the spoken language. It almost feels like two different languages completely.
Yeah. Because not every word will be translated into English or has an English word, so you just use that English word. Right. But if you're learning Tagalog, you don't know if there's a Tagalog word for it, or if it's only an English word for it, or if it's a Spanish word for it. Exactly. There's a lot of options there to choose from.
I first found your videos on TikTok. I watched a video that you made. I think you were even speaking some Tagalog. I can't remember exactly what it is, but you have like all kinds of different videos, and it's cool to see how passionate you are about Filipino culture. How did you get started making content?
I started in Chicago before I was like married and stuff. Actually, I was married. It was during the pandemic, yeah. But we were long distance married, so. But just started posting things like flowers and plants because I was a floral designer. And then the first video that actually went like semi-viral of mine was a mall vlog because I was blown away. You probably know this, but in the Philippines, there's a lot of like malls that are just massive and gorgeous and like decked out. And then there's grocery stores at the bottom level sometimes. And I was like, this is the best thing I've ever seen. I was so excited. I think I filmed me going to the mall and showing like what the grocery store looks like and stuff. And that got like maybe 5,000 likes. And I was like, what? This is crazy. So then I just started making more content, and it was really a nice way for me to kind of transition into the culture because I would get a lot of comments from Filipinos explaining things or to ask questions, and they would kind of guide me through it. It was a really sweet time to have a community when I was like kind of lacking it in a way. So TikTok was my little community.
And did you have any interest in the Philippines before you met your husband?
I did not know hardly anything about the Philippines. Jonathan was like my one exposure to the Philippines. And we started dating in high school. And then in college, I actually had a lot of college mates that were Filipino as well. So that was really helpful.
So how long have you guys known each other?
We started talking December 15th of 2015.
Okay, now we're at 2024. So was that 9 years?
It was right at the end of 2015. So
wow. Okay. That's a long time. It's a lot of exposure to a culture. And really, it only takes one person. Obviously, if you're in a committed relationship, you're going to want to know about the cultural background of your partner, right? Yeah, that's how I started with Filipino culture as well. I had a girlfriend from the Philippines.
Okay, I was so curious, but I didn't want to ask.
Speaking Tagalog with Filipinos, it's a question that I get all the time, and so
yeah, that's why I didn't want to ask.
It is an important part of my journey with Tagalog. I wanted to learn the language for my girlfriend at the time. I wanted to understand her culture and be able to speak with her friends and family, and didn't want to feel left out at Filipino parties and stuff.
Oh, that's the worst.
It is the worst. So I put a lot of effort into that early on, and then even though we're not together anymore, I still have this connection to the culture, which is kind of a cool thing. And Filipinos are so welcoming as well. How did you find your day-to-day life in the Philippines? Was it really different than how you live in the States?
Yeah, it's really different. I think the biggest difference is that we were always on night shift in the Philippines. My husband worked full-time night shift, and then I worked part-time being like an online teacher, and then doing that night shift as well because my students, a lot of them were in the States. So just the time difference was so huge. My day-to-day life was a lot more limited in the Philippines, and that's for like a lot of reasons, but one of them was I didn't really go out alone that much. And in the States, I had a car, I could drive anywhere I wanted. But in the Philippines, it wasn't the same. I would normally take my husband with me, but on the weekends, I went out a lot more, especially with my family. They would take me to different provinces and stuff. So that would be a little different. When I lived in the States, I didn't live next to my family, so it's just basically me. But in the Philippines, I was with my family all the time. I was with my church mates all the time. So I would think I was a lot more social for sure on the weekends. But during the week, we just had to stay inside because working and trying to sleep, and you hear karaoke and the dogs and the taho seller. We did not sleep much. Exactly, yeah.
Do you think that Americans are more independent in that they want to do things on their own and have their own vehicle, like you said, and kind of have their own schedule?
I do think so, yeah. I think Americans value two things. They love their independence, of course, and then they also love convenience. So if you put just an average American on a jeepney, they would probably flip out. They would be horrified about how close you have to sit next to each other, how short it is, because a lot of Americans are taller. They would hate to be uncomfortable, no aircon, no AC. So I definitely do think it's convenience. You want your own space and your own schedule.
So even though the culture was really different than what you were used to, you were there for 2 years, and you said that you weren't really all that homesick. You were happy to be there.
Yeah, I really was.
So what did you enjoy about living in the Philippines?
I really enjoyed the culture of being late. I know that sounds really weird because I'm very uptight in the US. I'm not going to be 5 minutes early to work. Jonathan, what are we going to do? I was like that way for a couple months, and then the culture really broke me, and I was like, whatever, we can be late, whatever, I don't care anymore.
So you embraced Filipino time. Was that hard to reverse when you came back to the States?
I think it was easier for me to reverse because suddenly you're back in your own element and you know how the rules and everything are. But I think for Jonathan, I'm trying to teach him in a way of okay, these are the things we actually have to be on time for. We need to leave and be there on time because you know how it's received if you're late.
That's the interesting thing about having a relationship or a marriage, in your guys' case, that's multicultural. Is that challenging at times to have two cultures in the same house?
I would say Jonathan and I, because we did so much long distance, 5 years, I think we do have pretty strong communication with each other. But there's certain, there's always certain things that you're I just don't understand. But I think the important stuff we definitely do agree on. A lot of times social things is what we would have a different perspective on. An example, going to someone's house in the States for the first time, I would be okay, I gotta bring flowers, we gotta be on time, we gotta ask if we should bring anything, those kind of things. But I think in a Filipino context, it's a little different. You just show up with someone, you don't ask ahead of time. But for an American who wants to plan everything out, well, if she's already making chicken, I can't bring chicken, I have to bring something else, but Filipinos, just bring whatever you want and we'll just make it work.
A little bit more flexible. And you're saying that your culture is a little bit more rigid in terms of expectations and...
Yeah, I think there are some high expectations in Filipino culture too. I just haven't learned them all yet.
Yeah, sometimes when you're in a different culture, I've experienced this myself. You can kind of just like plead ignorance or innocence or whatever, where you're like, I don't really understand the culture fully, and so if I don't meet everyone else's expectations, they're gonna have to be okay with that. Do you have a favorite Filipino food?
There's so many. For some reason, I need to find those red juicy hot dogs here because that's all I think about right now is those. Have you seen those? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think so.
The bright red ones. Oh my goodness, they're so good. It depends on what mood I'm in, but right now my mood is I want one of those hot dogs and they put like marshmallows on the top and then put a skewer through. And it's like, I don't know, I had it once at a Christmas party and it's delicious.
Marshmallows with a hot dog? That sounds like a crazy combination. I haven't seen that before.
It's delightful.
I've had those hot dogs just like on a skewer before, and I've definitely seen them cut up in like Filipino spaghetti. And the sauce for that too is also like bright red.
It is bright red, yeah. There's certain things that are colored super differently. Like the duck egg is like bright pink.
It's a salted egg?
Yes, exactly. Do you know puto? Like the little, looks like a muffin. That's really bright colors. Or the empanada is like bright orange.
Yeah, I didn't really think about that before, but yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah, they draws attention. Yeah, ube. Is there lots of Filipinos in? You said you're in Michigan?
So I grew up in Michigan, but now I live in Maryland. If I want to have any Filipino food, I basically have to drive like an hour to an hour and a half away. There are like Asian markets that have some Filipino ingredients, so I can like get by, I can make do. But recently, I would say in the last 6 months, I got connected to Sandra. She messaged me on TikTok. She's like, I make pandesal and a whole bunch of like ube and Filipino desserts. So I went there and I got some delicious food, and then she invited me to her Christmas party, and then I found out she has like a neighborhood with like 10, 12 other Filipino families, and I was like, this is where y'all have been this whole time?
I grew up in a really small town with like 5,000 people. Growing up, obviously there was like hardly any Filipinos. But then when I started going to like college and university, I realized like how many Filipinos there actually were like living around here. And now like 9 or 10 years later, there's actually Filipinos in my hometown. As different food chains have come into our town and there's more employment, now there's more Filipinos. So it's cool to see it grow even just over the last few years.
The same way, like I grew up and I couldn't even eat like my mom's white tacos. I was like, it's too spicy for me. I can't. There's just no cultural food at all in the city I grew up. But like you said, like it is starting to change. And now I think there's a Chinese restaurant. And one city over, I found like randomly that there was an Asian market and it's next to a nail salon and then a bubble tea shop. And I was like, it's been here the whole time. So yeah, I love seeing that like expand throughout the US. I think it's much needed. Once people get the exposure and get over the fear of the unknown, it totally changes your perspective. And I think like even myself, I used to be very ignorant and just didn't know a lot about things. So of course I'm gonna have the wrong perspective or not the right idea. But once I got immersed into a whole bunch of different cultures and were friends with a lot of international friends in college, then I was like, oh, this totally makes sense. Like, I understand now.